You like my new digs? I'm going to be shooting this from Florida as often as I can. We're going to talk in today's history video about the emergence of political parties in the United States and the role that Washington, Hamilton, and Jefferson played in the emergence of parties during Washington's first term in office. When Washington took office, there were no political parties in the United States. In fact, Washington's election was unanimous. In fact, there weren't elections, really. The idea was that the state legislatures would choose the electoral college, which would be a bunch of really well-established people, the aristocracy of the country, and they would decide who the best president would be. And Washington, of course, ran unopposed. And as a symbol, he put the leading representative of the forces of more democratization, Thomas Jefferson, as Secretary of State, and the leading proponent of more centralized authority, Alexander Hamilton, as the Secretary of the Treasury. But then the French Revolution came, and it set up a dramatic challenge to the idea of democracy. Initially promoting democracy, getting rid of all of the kingdoms and all of the monarchies that had controlled Europe. But then as that became the reign of terror, and they just routinely killed 10,000 people over the course of it, it became seen as mob rule. And that triggered a real reaction in the United States. The supporters of France, who after all had been our key ally in the revolution, said France is now a democracy. They got rid of their king. They're fighting to spread democracy. Let's stand with France. The supporters of Britain said, my God, look what happens when there's democracy. Look at these executions and the guillotine and everything. We have to make sure that doesn't happen here. And the forces of the central government, Alexander Hamilton, tend to side with Britain, and the forces that, like France, Thomas Jefferson, were the democratizing element. And they really had sharp disagreements. The first big disagreement was whether the federal government should assume the state debts that were contracted during the American Revolution. Virginia said no because they'd paid their debt, and Massachusetts and New York said yes because they still owed money. But on an ideological level, Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, said either we assume the debts or we're not one country. And to understand the wisdom of what Hamilton said, look at the European Union now, where they thought they could have a common currency, but not a common assumption of debt, and every country went off doing its own thing, and now they were facing bankruptcy and don't know how to deal with it. Hamilton said that would happen in the United States, we have to stop it. Jefferson said this is an amalgamation of power. It's going to set up a moneyed elite that will control the country. And he was against that, constantly worrying about the reassertion of monarchy in the United States. Bear in mind, there had never been a republic that had ever succeeded in the history of the world. They either went the way France did and became mob rule, or went the way Rome did and became a monarchy under Julius Caesar. None had ever succeeded, and both sides were scared to death that that would happen to the United States. Well, they cut a deal. And Alexander Hamilton said, I will agree to put the new national capital in Virginia in return for the assumption of debt. And Jefferson, bear in mind travel distances were huge back then, felt that if the capital was up in New York, which it was in the first Washington term, Southerners would have very little access to it and would be kind of cut out. So that was the first deal. But after that, they couldn't paper it over with deals, and parties began more and more to assert themselves. As the developments in France became more and more horrific, the partisan nature of the process got even more vivid. Well, Washington was unanimously reelected to a second term, but Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State and basically left the cabinet in control of Hamilton, who increasingly was emerging as the leading influence on Washington. And Washington, who had led the army during the Revolution, was aware of what a weak central government could do. He couldn't get provisions, he couldn't get ammunition, he couldn't get support from the Congress during the Revolution. He won the Revolution despite Congress. So he understood the need for central authority, and that's what Hamilton was pushing. But Jefferson was looking at a broad sweep of history, saying if we continue this, we're going to ultimately end up with a monarchy in the United States. And that was the growth of political partisanship.